I have already ranked seasons 1 through 5 of SpongeBob, which are considered the best seasons. I personally don't think season 5 is great, but it's definitely better than season 6. Season 6 is very bad. Most of the episodes are extremely forgettable, and some of them are just downright unwatchable, but I must rank every season, so we must go on. In my last place spot, I have the Splinter. Oh god, I can't believe I actually have to talk about this. This is far and away the worst SpongeBob episode I've talked about so far. In fact, probably the worst of all time. It's disgusting. Almost every shot just makes you uncomfortable, and I just want to look away. When people talk about mid-season and modern SpongeBob, this is what I think about. Because this is trash. Not to mention Patrick is terrible and makes it even worse. It's like Suds, except everything is 20 times worse. Truth or Square is far and away the worst SpongeBob special episode. It's basically a movie, but it could literally be a regular 11-minute episode. The two songs are both terrible. The plot is basically non-existent. I mean, literally nothing was achieved in this episode. They got stuck in the pipes underground and people were mad. Wow, such an interesting and original idea for an hour-long SpongeBob special. Did I mention that there were 20 flashbacks that were completely irrelevant? Yeah, this is a very bad episode that is supposed to be the 10th anniversary for SpongeBob. Choir Boys is considered by a lot to be the worst SpongeBob episode of the entire series, and I won't argue with it. The first 8 to 9 minutes is Squidward torture, and then the final few minutes is dumb and unpleasant to look at. Season 6 is notorious for having the most Squidward torture than any other season, and this is the first of many that I'll be talking about. And yeah, this episode is terrible and idiotic. Well, it looks like we got back-to-back Squidward torture episodes, because next up is Cephalopod Lodge. SpongeBob and Patrick are just beyond frustrating in this episode. Remember when SpongeBob and Patrick had signs of intelligence and actual logic and reason? Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. And just when you think that Squidward's actually gonna get into the lodge that he deserves to be in, SpongeBob and Patrick turn into idiots and ruin their plan. And Squidward ends up losing the one thing that made him happy. Yeah, not the most fun thing. Also, why do the citizens of Bikini Bottom, SpongeBob, Mr. Krabs, and Patrick actually care that Squidward is happy? Shouldn't they be happy about it, instead of trying to figure out what's going on? That was something that always kind of confused me. I don't really know if Squid's Visit is a SpongeBob torturing Squidward episode, or just a terrible episode that focuses on Squidward. Well, whatever it is not a good episode. In fact, it's terrible. It's just creepy to know that SpongeBob knows exactly what Squidward's house looks like. And of course the ending has Squidward going through more pain and there's no consequences at all for SpongeBob. Which is one of my biggest problems for episodes like this, and one of the main reasons why Season 6 is probably my second least favorite season, only behind Season 7. I think it just goes to show how bad Squidward torture porn is in Season 6, and we have 4 episodes in a row with Squidward torture in it. Boating Buddies is better than the last 3, but not by a lot. I have the same problems. Squidward is the one who ends up having the worst of everything at the end of the episode, and SpongeBob gets no consequences for his terrible actions to Squidward. But it's a tiny bit better because there is a bit of creativity. But it's still basically unwatchable. Wow, 5 Squidward torture episodes in a row. Giant Squidward has all the same problems as the last few, and I really don't want to talk about it. It's hard to watch. Squidward goes through terrible things he doesn't have to go through. And of course, SpongeBob and Patrick are total idiots. So yeah, this one is terrible. Well, we're finally done with Squidward torture, and now we're on the Clash of Triton. This one is just so forgettable. It's not offensive, and if it was 11 minutes long, it wouldn't be this low. But it's over 20 minutes long, and there's nothing interesting going on. In what world would I care about King Neptune, a character who rarely shows up, and when he does, he's there for like 5 minutes, and his bratty loser teenager Triton? Everyone is so annoying in this episode, especially Triton. This special is miserable to get through and did not interest me at all. Pet or Pests is just a disgusting episode. Really hated those weird worm things, especially when they spat out that weird green liquid. That was just disgusting. This episode had a really weird premise too. SpongeBob tries to give away these disgusting worms because their mom abandoned them, but nobody wants them, obviously. But the weirdest part was when Larry tried to eat the worms. That was disgusting and caught me off guard. Grooming Gary is basically the Great Snail Race, but way less funnier, a lame ending, and a million times more painful. SpongeBob is as dumb as ever in this season, and Grooming Gary suffers from this a lot. I also think it's a really awkward episode. They treat Gary like a stupid mutt, and it just isn't fun, because everyone likes his snail. Nobody talks about this one for really bad episodes, but for me it definitely is one. I really want to put Gone even lower because I hate the idea of it. Everyone in Bikini Bottom leave for no SpongeBob Day, even Patrick, and it's just really offensive to him, and I do feel quite bad. I hated seeing SpongeBob go crazy from loneliness, and then figuring out it's just everyone in the town being jerks. But I do admit, I laughed when Patrick came out of the bus with that anti-SpongeBob shirt, even if it was mean. And I can't say I laughed for any other episode so far. The episode Overbooked is just really hard to watch. For someone who can't relate to not being able to say no, I just couldn't connect with this one. I hated to see SpongeBob go through so much just because he's too good to say no. Or I can't do it right now. The whole time I was just rolling my eyes because it was so painful to watch. I just can't connect to this one personally, so I didn't like it. The card is just a new level of Patrick being annoying and easy to hate. I mean, Patrick was never this dumb. Yeah, even in the original seasons, he was a total idiot and did some bad things, but he always had well-meaning. It always felt like he was trying to do something good. And even when he does do something bad, he's aware and tries to fix it. But not here. He has no idea what he's doing wrong, and it makes for a miserable episode to sit through. The Krabby Chronicle is a very forgettable episode. Nothing of notice really happens. I guess the message is that fake news is bad and it can hurt people, but the target audience doesn't watch the news. At least that's what I thought. I never watched the news when I was younger. What kid would want to watch the news? It's boring and talks about politics and other stuff that only adults care about. So nobody who watches this cares about the news. Which is why I just didn't care about this episode, and I don't understand what they were trying to do with it. Poorest Pockets is just a weird and uncomfortable episode. I hate seeing SpongeBob as a stuck-up rich loser. I hate stuck-up rich people. Not all rich people, but ones who think they're better than everyone simply because they have more money. But SpongeBob? I mean, it's just uncomfortable to see him act like this. We already have Mr. Krabs who's super greedy, but that's his natural personality, so it doesn't bother me that much. But a character who's so pure just turning into a greedy loser, it just makes me uncomfortable to watch it. Okay, I don't actually think that Penny Foolish is a really bad episode. It's just so boring and uninteresting that I can't put it any higher. I mean, I wanted to cry watching this. Not actually, but it was an insufferable 11 minutes that I will never get back, and that is very sad. I have a similar problem with Plankton's Regular as I do with Enemy in Law, which is a Season 4 episode I didn't rank too high on my list. And that problem is that I knew the entire time what was going to happen. The whole thing just screamed too good to be true, and what do you know, it was. I guess it was cool that Karen did all this just to make Plankton feel better, but other than that, it was just boring because I knew exactly what was going to happen, and there was no exciting stuff in the episode for me. Shell Shocked has possibly the dumbest SpongeBob of all time, which usually would make this one of the worst in the season, but there were a few jokes I liked, and I liked Angry Jack a lot, but when SpongeBob destroyed his store, it just was not fun to watch. I also hated the ending where Mr. Krabs gave away his shell. I always hate seeing Krabs naked, it's just gross. And it's also unrealistic that Mr. Krabs would do that. Even if he is greedy, it's just ridiculous. Yeah, this is not my favorite episode. Sun Bleach is an episode I don't have a lot to say about. I didn't like the new character they introduced. He was boring and his design was hideous. And Patrick was also ridiculously frustrating in this episode, especially when he left SpongeBob in the tanning machine. That left me pretty annoyed. This one also had no jokes that were funny. Overall, this one is very forgettable and just gets lost in Season 6. I said that Shell Shocked was the most stupid SpongeBob has ever been, but it honestly could have been Gullible Pants. SpongeBob literally trashed his restaurant because Squidward told him to, and he thought that it would make it look better. It's a really bad episode and just hard to get through, but it has some funny moments. I have to admit, SpongeBob's dance was pretty funny, but it doesn't get rid of the bad stuff in the episode. The Patty Caper could have been a great episode if it had a better ending, but the ending ruined the entire thing. Come on, Mr. Krabs stole his own formula, that's just ridiculous. I wish there was a new character or an old character that could have stolen it, and we could have had a cool ending scene. But instead, we just got a lame and forgettable episode. I do like No Nose Knows for the reason that Patrick seems to have found something new and interesting to him, but it doesn't involve ruining people's life. But the second half is not that enjoyable. The main people working together to take away something that Patrick actually likes and is happy with. But I can understand where they're coming from, so it's not that bad, but it's still just a kind of forgettable episode. Grandpappy the Pirate can be enjoyable at times. There's some cool original ideas, and I like Mr. Krabs' grandpa. But I do think that it was very stupid that the grandpa actually believed that it was a boat for a bit. I couldn't stop thinking about it and made it less enjoyable. I would have preferred if they actually went to the ocean as well. But it was still pretty fun at times, and I had some fun with it. It wasn't the worst episode. To SquarePants or not to SquarePants is a pretty stupid episode, but I had my fun with it. I like the part where SpongeBob kind of turned into Squidward. That was funny and it was a pretty interesting idea. But this also suffers from SpongeBob being extra stupid, that it makes me lose brain cells. Definitely could have been worse though, because it was pretty enjoyable at times. Ditchin' is fairly average. There's nothing too memorable, but there was nothing that was offensive. It was just okay. I personally never ditch classes. I show up late sometimes and it was a class that the teacher wouldn't care, but I never straight up skip class. So that probably took away some enjoyment, but it was still pretty funny and I would watch it again. Shuffleboarding is kinda like ditching. I just don't care about it. It can be funny at times, but most of it was forgettable and unimpressive. Man Ray is in this episode, and I love Man Ray, but he was very pointless and his exchanges with that old lady were very forgettable. I also wish we got to see the shuffleboarding, but hey, this episode isn't offensive. Once again, it's just kinda there. Dear Vikings is a pretty creative and interesting episode. I really like the Vikings, and while their designs were kinda weird and awkward to look at, I think they fit their personality well. I also like how they talked and thought that what they did was very funny, but a lot of the episode is very boring. I just wasn't entertained at any time before the Vikings showed up. Even when they were there, I just couldn't bring myself to be entertained. So yeah, this one gets a bit lower than I initially thought it would. But rewatching it, it was not as good as I remember it being when I was younger. Nautical Novice was on pace to be one of my favorite episodes of the entire season. I liked the premise of SpongeBob being a boating expert and touring these kids around. I was smiling and when I was watching and I thought I would rank it very high. But then they killed it with that stupid scene at the end where SpongeBob drives the boat. But then it turns out it was just some guy pulling the museum. It just felt so pointless and empty. When I say house fancy, what do you think of? Probably the toenail scene, right? And yeah, that scene is disgusting and disturbing, and definitely helped the downfall of mid-season SpongeBob. But outside of that, I actually kinda enjoyed it. There's Squidward torture here and there, but I feel like he kinda had it coming because he put himself in a terrible situation, so I didn't feel too bad for him. He was just too arrogant for me to sympathize with him. And he ended up winning in the end, which is always fun to see. So yeah, I don't really hate this episode, unlike a lot of other people. A Life in a Day is a pretty cool episode where we see SpongeBob and Patrick completely change personalities and act brave and fearless. They really start living like Larry. And it's really fun. For someone who doesn't like Larry that much, I don't like it as much as some other people do, but everything else is really fun and it's a pretty enjoyable episode. Computer Overload is a pretty sweet episode that focuses on Plankton and Karen, but I do think an episode later in the video does it a bit better, but this episode is still pretty good. I like the new computers that were introduced, they were pretty creative, and I like the ending where Plankton and Karen reunited and had a sweet little moment. But I do think Plankton was a little mean to Karen in a very frustrating way, even though Karen does it all the time. But other than that, it was an enjoyable episode. Pineapple Fever is a fairly entertaining episode. To be fair, a lot of the jokes were pretty bad, especially the one where SpongeBob kept on repeating the same thing over and over again. I just thought that dragged on for way too long. But I just can't hate this episode simply because of the premise. The main three characters being stuck in SpongeBob's house during a storm is just a great idea, and they execute it very well. Slide Whistle Stooges is an episode I can't really figure out my opinion on. This is a rare occasion where I never actually saw this episode before ranking the season, and in the first half I just thought that it was gonna be another Squidward torture porn episode. But to my surprise, I really found the second half entertaining and really good. I had a huge smile on my face seeing Squidward having a great time, which is what ultimately willed me to put this episode in the top 15, even though it might not actually deserve it. Professor Squidward is a very funny Squidward torture porn episode. Yes, I just said that. I found myself laughing at so many moments, and yes, I felt guilty about it, but it was just so funny. I loved when Squilliam was just standing there with a blank expression on his face when Squidward got busted, and I loved all the antics that SpongeBob and Patrick did for the same reasons as House Fancy. And that reason is that Squidward deserves what's coming. He lied about his identity, so I do not feel bad for him. Spongekiss is a really creative episode with an interesting premise. SpongeBob in a coliseum with gladiator battles, I mean, that is sick. But they executed it as poorly as possible. The only scene that I think they did a good job with was the scene where SpongeBob and Patrick were actually in the coliseum. But a lot of it was filler and just unfunny, especially the ending scene where they all laugh and the phone booth joke. But the premise is just too good. Not Normal is a pretty fun episode, and I have to say that I can really relate to SpongeBob here. People telling you that you're not normal or that you need to change is something that always makes me sad to hear. I usually deal with it, but it always makes me kinda insecure. And SpongeBob tackles this concept pretty well, and I like seeing SpongeBob completely change character as much as I like to see him turn back to normal. The Slumber Party is a really good episode that focuses on Pearl. And Pearl is a character that I'm kinda conflicted on. I don't know if she's annoying or the way the show uses her is annoying, but usually Pearl kinda rubs me the wrong way and annoys me quite a bit. But in this one I thought she was pretty entertaining and had good chemistry with SpongeBob. The Slumber Party just barely misses out on the top 10, which to be fair isn't a too exclusive club for a terrible season like this. Chum Caverns is an episode that is completely carried by the visuals for me. All the video visuals were very creative and pleasant to look at, and I also think that it's just a cool idea to see an underground restaurant, but those weird creatures were very strange. The fact that an episode that the only thing it can praise is the visuals made the top 10 just proves how bad the season is. No Hat for Pat is one of my favorite Patrick-centered episodes ever, which is surprising considering it was made in Season 6, and honestly it's 10 times better than Chum Caverns. I love this episode because Patrick actually cares about his reputation, and he wants to be accepted, unlike usual where he just doesn't care how people feel about him. You go to extreme lengths just to be accepted by the people around him. My only flaw with this one is that Squidward ended up going through more pain than anyone, but hey, this is Season 6 we're talking about. Krusty Crushers is a hilarious episode with some of my favorite visual gags of the season. The whole thing is just non-stop jokes and action, and somehow they all work. It's a miracle that they pulled this off like they did. I also really like the two wrestlers and how they were just mindless brutes. And the ending where SpongeBob and Patrick ended up going to camp instead of taking the money, it just shows how pure they are. And how stupid. Single Cell Anniversary is probably the episode that left me with the biggest smile on my face. It probably had my favorite moment in the entire season, being the Plankton song towards Karen. This is definitely my favorite episode that focuses on these two. Even if we don't get a lot, this one really left a good impression on me. I also really like SpongeBob's well-being in this episode and how he tries to help his enemy learn what love is. Chum Bucket Supreme is definitely one of the funniest of the season. It's just enough wacky and idiotic that it doesn't cross the line. The slogan "Chum is fun" left me cracking up for a while, but I lost it when it just became "Fum is chum." But the best part were the customers who didn't even care about the food because the slogan is so good. This gag was definitely my favorite part of the episode.
Chum tastes awful.
Yeah, but the slogan is so catchy that we can't stop eating it.
Chum is fun.
Overall, this episode is hilarious and one of the funniest of the season. Opening off my top 5 is Krabby Road. I love the concept of this episode. SpongeBob, Squidward, Patrick, and Plankton starting a band is such an interesting premise, and so many great things come out of it. But Buff Squidward was definitely the best part about the episode. I mean, that was glorious. But the jokes in this one were also super memorable, and I was never bored one time. While this one is barely above Chum Bucket Supreme, I do think it deserves to be in the top 5. SpongeBob SquarePants vs. the Big One is the most underrated special, in my opinion. A lot of people don't like this episode, and I just can't see why. I mean, it is hilarious. To be fair, I have a soft spot for island-themed episodes and movies. They're always so fun and have lots of cool visuals. And I also love the characters they introduced for this special. The dropouts in JKL were hilarious and had some funny moments, especially when JKL came out of the shack and his board just kept getting bigger. And the song in the middle was super funny. It did a great job of parodying others like it. So yeah, this is a very good episode to me. Toy Story of Doom is definitely one of the most creative episodes in the show. That's right, the show, not just the season. There's so much visual gags that always leave me cracking up as well. Like when the dad jumped out after his kid and dragged him back. And some of the jokes were so out there and ridiculous that I couldn't help but laugh, like these two.
Patrick, is that you?
What?
I said, is that you?
I can't hear you! It's too dark in here! So go ahead and lock her up, Frank. My name is Steve. Whatever floats your boat, Frank.
While personally I never liked toy stores too much, I still found this one very entertaining and enjoyable. Sandcastles in the Sand is perhaps the most beloved post-movie SpongeBob episode, and I can totally see why. It has some of the most creative and hilarious moments in the series, and I never thought it got out of hand. And once again, the visual gags were so creative and hilarious. It's also so cool that they can make a great episode like this from Sandcastles. But it's not number 1 because the first part before they actually started to make Sandcastles was insufferable. Especially the scene on the bus. But when it got going, it got going. And my number 1 choice for Season 6 is Suction Cup Symphony. This, I can definitely say, is one of my favorite SpongeBob episodes ever. It's not even close to perfect, and would barely make the top 10 in Seasons 2 and 3. But for a season as bad as this, it is so memorable. Through the entire runtime, I was so entertained and genuinely felt happy. A word I never thought I could associate with Season 6 of SpongeBob. I really have no flaws with this episode. The part where Squidward writes his song is hilarious, and of course the performance itself is just so funny. SpongeBob and Patrick doing all this random stuff while everyone is just so confused is so funny. And just when you think it can't get better, Squidward is the one that gets all the credit, which is so amazing to see. Overall, Season 6 is a really weird season. It has some of the lowest lows, but some of the highest highs. While it was miserable to watch, there were some times where I felt pretty entertained. And now having conquered Season 6, on to Season 7. Oh, Season 7. Oh god, please help me, I don't want to sit through this trash. Whatever, it can't be that bad, right? Right?